Hello, welcome back. I do apologize for the first section of recording. I got finished and it did not record my screen, so I had to go back and redo those 38 minutes. So I do apologize for that, and the sound will be better now, and I'm sure we'll be rolling along here in this part too. And I will shoot for shorter segments. So I appreciate your tolerance with this new learning curve. So we are on page 10 of the PowerPoint. And one of the things that has started to have a lot more conversation is centered around the ACE score. The ACEs scoring system is for the medical profession primarily. It is also for students who are 18 years and older. So while I think it's really important for us to consider those categories as well as in relation to who we have in our classroom and the students that we are working with, I also think there's a caution that needs to be made with just assigning a child an ACE score. So there's beginning to be a lot of conversation around that, some very new insight, and not really something I considered when I first became aware of the adverse childhood experiences. But I'm on the bandwagon now of it's important to be aware. But really, as educators, I do not think it is our purpose or our place to assign children numbers. So this diagram is from Ellis and Dietz, and it's really just an important graphic of the different things that our students experience at home. And then you will see the relationship down below of some of the community environment things that we have already covered and talked about. So this just kind of puts it in a graphic that for us visual learners, that is important for us to consider and take a look at and really reflect about not only the knowledge in this graphic, but also begin to consider how our biases and our view or the lens that we view our students with. And that is a very important part of becoming trauma informed and then moving on through the trauma lens and application of understanding what trauma-informed care truly is. So just take a look at this and pause if you need to, and we will move on. But that's my primary point with this slide is be very cautious with assigning students a number. I feel like their experiences are more than a number, and it's important to be aware of these things, but the purpose of the score is more for the medical field and how they treat patients. So an awareness and also a caution. So moving on to page 10, you will see that this is one of the two primary resources for this class, and it is the Child Trauma Toolkit for Educators. The reason that I included it, I went through probably 2 or 3 months of narrowing down the content and the knowledge and all the resources out there at this time, and really narrowed them down to things that might be useful for you. Whether you're at the beginning of your journey or the middle. And so this is one of the primary resources, like I said. It is a child trauma toolkit for educators. And the reason that I really like this is because it is a resource kit where you can click on, and we were going to divide up into groups and read through things that you might observe. And so I really want you to pause here, go into the original PowerPoint, and dig around a little bit in this resource. Take some time here, in the level of the students that you work with, and really see what things that you are observing that could have a basis of poverty or trauma. So, like I said, I just encourage you to pause and take some time in this resource. So moving on, this is a slide that talks a little bit more about when we talked about the various levels of trauma and how often our students are experiencing trauma and other things like that. An important thing to focus on is the survival brain versus learning brain. And you have probably heard it called fight, flight, or fight. It is a normal system that we all have, and it helps warn us when we're under threat. So we will know whether to fight, to flee, or to freeze. The thing to think about is when our students are experiencing repeated trauma, whether it's secondary or not, the brain and their body is put in a chronic state of fear. And so their survival brain or their lower parts of the brain are activated all the time. And it takes very little to push those students into that area. And as we learn a little bit more about triggers, you will become aware of things that you can do to keep students from feeling this. And, there are things such as your voice level, your voice tone, ways to handle behavior, give them choices, back off, all of these things in your toolbox that you can utilize to help our students who are pretty much in that chronic state. One example is if you think about students, they come to school and what they bring with them. And many of them, their cups are already very full. So when they get to school and they are asked to do something that you determine as a simple directive, it can quickly boil their cup over because they have less room in that cup for emotions and for self-regulation and problem solving and all those different things. So it's really important to think about it like that. It does affect students' brain over time if they are in this chronic state. We do know that the hippocampus shrinks. Their amygdala is overused, basically, and the amygdala becomes enlarged. So these students have a very overactive alarm system. They're easily triggered, even when there is no actual threat. So I think as you're reading this and thinking about the students in your classroom, you're realizing that these requests make these children react to normal things that you ask them to do as if they were life and death. This is not a rational cognitive process. It is wired into their physiological response. So the most important thing to think about in this cycle is it is not about you. Let me repeat, their behavior is not about you. And when you learn to think like that all behavior is purposeful, and take your personal self out of it, you will begin to be on your way to supporting these students and strategies that they need to move beyond this. So think about that. It is not about you. It's not about them being disrespectful. You really just have to take yourself out of it. And this can be very difficult when you are dealing with the student day in and day out. And that's why sometimes some of the behavior strategies, such as a buddy classroom, a private conversation, a calm down or safe spot in your classroom, sometimes you need to have a team of teachers or administrators that you can reach out to get a break from this, because we bring things to work as well. So sometimes that pressure those students perceive, we have a bad day, we have less patience, all of those things are real. And so I really encourage you to work on a support system in your grade level, as well as with your administrators, for if you need a break, if you need to tag out and let someone else handle it. But a lot of it is about time. Give the student time and choices. When students are in this flight or fight mode, they are not making rational decisions. They cannot talk about their behavior. They cannot rationally make choices. And so what I really tell teachers during this time is be quiet. Stop talking. Allow the student to come down, to de-escalate, and then you begin to repair, restore, and have the conversation about what is needed to be done. So I teach more about that in my behavior class, but we're not going to get into a huge detail about that right now. But a lot of the students have 4 characteristics if they are in this chronic state. They live in a fear state. Their memory is very disordered. They have a dysregulated affect or relation to their own emotions out of personal protection. And the last one is that they avoid intimacy. So if you can build relationships with them, you are way ahead of the curveball, and it will help when your students go into these states, that you can begin to make it last a less amount of time, and then begin to move on towards what you need them to do or what you have asked them to do. All right, so we're on slide 13, many preventative interventions. These are things that these students experience, and you probably at times exasperate them without even knowing. But common triggers are if they are in a classroom that is very unpredictable, or the expectations are not the same day in and day out. So all the classroom procedures and basic strategies, your classroom has to be a well-oiled machine day in and day out. These students feel sensory overload at times, and that's why a journal, a safe spot, a timeout, ways that they can take a break before they get to the explosion are things that are very helpful. Most of the time, this is coming from feeling vulnerable or frustrated about something. Confrontation does not go well for you or them. That's very important to move to a what we need, like a side-by-side conversation, but only after they de-escalate. So when possible, give them choices, listen to them ahead of time, and give them some ownership in what they're learning or the output. Pressure that they may feel in your classroom, or with time, or with not knowing what to do, leads to frustration. So when they are in a triggered state, the learning brain goes offline. Verbal warnings, rational arguments that make demands on these higher functioning skills that they may not have only escalate the situation because they are not able to access these functions when they are in a triggered state. So if you Google YouTube, the hand model of the brain, I teach my students in elementary about the hand model of the brain, and when they flip their lids, then the upper brain upstairs and the downstairs brain is not talking until they calm back down and are able to make rational decisions and choices. So there is a very good visual for that, and even my kindergarten students understand the upstairs brain, the downstairs brain, and how they have to use calm down tools to get back online. So escalating behaviors will quickly be apparent, and I'm sure you see this in your classroom every day. Arguing, off task, talking, not compliant, maybe verbally abusive, aggressive, and your primary defense is to stop talking. Do not talk until that student is regulated. Support them, restore the relationship, and then move on with the task that you ask. So anytime you can anticipate, it's better than reacting. This is where you need to know your students. Avoid that escalation. I see teachers all the time who just keep ramping it up. You've got to just be silent. So pay attention to the classroom environment and how it might be impacting students. Redirect behavior, give them choices or options, and most importantly, teach students to develop where they're at. The zones of regulation is what our buildings use, kindergarten through 6th grade. It is very amazing curriculum, and it has a lot of calm down strategies and other things like that. You have to teach the students the strategies, and it takes years. So keep on it, continue, look up zones of regulation. It's very effective. So we were going to do an activity called Ryan's Story, and it's basically about a student who comes to school with a lot of baggage, and then the teacher asks for a simple request and he explodes. So in previous, before learning about trauma, or your school system might be very punitive. And when you begin to become trauma informed, you look at the situation in a completely different lens. And that's what I mean when I say trauma informed care. It's not what you do, it's how you are, it's how you think, it's how you respond to students. So you are going to look at the same situations in a whole different way. And that's when you truly move along that continuum of trauma responsive and etc. So because we're not in class, we're not going to be able to do that. Slide 14, this really just talks about, to be trauma informed, your school and your classroom has to move through these steps. So you're going to think about the triggers in your daily routine. You minimize them. You recognize early when they might be harmful to your students who have experienced trauma. And you're going to shift your thinking, instead of punishing and confronting them and being argumentative, to how you can support them. So you're shifting to nonverbal support. You're using de-escalating strategies. You're avoiding arguing. Afterwards is when you can debrief, you reconnect this with the student, you develop plans and help them be safe mostly, and find out what will help them. So this is a model that is very important to move through as you begin to understand what trauma-informed care and what that environment looks like in your classroom. On slide 15, these are some myths, and this is where it gets deep. Thinking about your understanding of what poverty is, what trauma is, and being aware of how you are, what you think about students who experience poverty or trauma. Get rid of all the discrimination, all the things that you think you know, and truly begin to develop relationships with these students, find out where they're coming from, overcome your biases, and move through your understanding of what they are really and truly bringing to your classroom every day. Your first best strategy when doing this is to develop relationships with them. Find out the barriers, find out what is really going on in their life. I could spend 5 or 10 minutes on this slide. We do not have that time. So really just begin to think about putting yourself in their position and the things that they are dealing with. Get to know them and get to know them outside of your academic area. That's the most important thing. Things they like to do, things that they're going through, all those things, and really work on a safe and caring environment. All right, the way that you can build relationships, there are many ways. You'll see here, be empathetic, work on that trust. View your parents as a key resource. They are on your side, and if they're not, you get them on your side. Let them know how much you care about their child, all the things that you're doing to support them. And when you approach parents in that way, I've never had a parent who I could not work with over time. Realize that they might not have had a good school experience, recognize that they might be distrustful, and you work super hard in building that relationship with the parents. Everyday interactions make the difference. Be present, listen, set aside time to bond with that student. Some teachers have students that in and out of their classroom that they are assigned to make contact with 1 or 2 times a week for 3 minutes, and it's non-school topic. So think about in your school or your classroom how you can do that. Teach routines and provide structure for them. Make sure that your school or your classroom becomes an extended family. The Power of Classroom meetings is a class that I do at Friends in the summer. It is amazing. Research shows that families, school families or class meetings have a huge, huge impact on these students that have experienced trauma. So definitely read more about those. And you know, when you take 10 or 15 minutes every day to build that family, even 2 or 3 times a week, it will allow you more time to teach, because you will be creating a system that those students can rely on. And a sense of belonging. You'll be modeling that effective problem solving, peer relationship thing that they can carry out when they leave your classroom or when they leave high school into their own families and the workplace. This is huge. Number 6 is huge. Number 7, move behind defined roles. You know, make connections with them, move beyond just their classroom teacher. Be apparent and open about your family, things you like to do, get to know theirs. You make such a huge difference. A lot of times on number 8, we talked about how some of the students that experience poverty or trauma are not recognized at school. So you find the ways that they are creative, the things that they're good at. They can be leaders as well as other students in your classroom. So look for ways that they can contribute, and they do contribute. And then number 9 is build a support for your students and yourself. That is a very important one. So just a few other things on building relationships. I'll try to keep them brief, but find a common ground. Be yourself. Don't be sympathetic. Be empathetic. Work on trust. Be calm. And many times these students do not respond to sarcasm. Humor, yes. Sarcasm, no. So be very cautious about that. Be intentional, be positive, listen to them, respect them. Ask 2-minute questions, just for 2 minutes every day or every couple days. Touch base with them. Allow your classroom and your students in your classroom to bond. Make sure your learning environment, like I said, is predictive and productive. Work on your class family. Belong to something bigger. So work on your class family, then extend that out to the community. Help those students learn that they can make a difference, not only in their classroom, but beyond the doors. That is a life skill, and it's giving back to your community. Show students that you care about them as a person. You know, you can't fake this. You need to find something that you can like about every single student in your classroom. They can tell by your voice, they can tell by your attitude, so many nonverbals. And we know that students will not work hard for people who do not truly and genuinely care about them. Value how they're unique, they're risk-taking, and most importantly, build resiliency in them. Oftentimes, some of these students have street smarts. Work on building resiliency, and that is a skill that they will take with them forever. Make sure you have partnerships with other staff and hold each other accountable. So those are just some of other suggestions for building relationships, and you'll notice that some of them overlap these first nine that we talked about. All right, expect success in your classroom. What you expect matters. So the question here is, what do you believe about students who live in poverty or experience trauma in terms of their ability to learn? You have to continue to have high expectations. You have to be supportive, and you have to systematically teach how they can be successful in your room. Teach, model, practice. Teach, model, practice. All right, another thing to think about here is you need to, let's see, we're gonna pause right here, I believe, on this slide.